Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. Today's episode I'm going to take you through part one of all of my fish. Alright guys, thank you for joining me on another episode of Parker's Reefs. Now this one has come to you from a member of the Parker's Reef channel who reached out and said, why don't you do a video going through all of the details of all of your fish? And I figured that was a fantastic idea. So I've gone about making the video. I have had to split it into two parts because I've got a lot of fish and there's quite a lot of information on all of them. So I thought in this part one of the video, I'll start off with my biggest fish and we'll work my way down to the smallest fish. Once I get about halfway through, I'll have to stop the video there and then we'll continue on with part two another day with all of my smaller fish, as well as covering the fish in my other tanks and potentially some fish that I want to add to this system because I guess spoiler alert, any fish that I want to add to this system now are going to be quite small. So the big fish are pretty well set in concrete. Let's jump into the details. Now, just before I go through all of the fish in the system, I will point out that some of the fish in here are 10 plus years in my custodianship, in that they've been with me in my previous display tank. Some of them are new to this tank, but some of them I have had for a long time, so they are absolute family members now. And you will also pick up on the theme when we go through that each and every fish in the system, well, at least each and every unique fish, once there's a pair or a trio, that's as far as we go. If they go into a school, we don't individually name them. But for pairs or trios, pairs and individual fish, we go into a fairly extensive naming process, which my whole family gets involved with, and it's a lot of fun. It gets every member of the family involved in the fish tank, and they then, I guess it's a double-edged sword, gives them a emotional bond to the fish. So you have to have your fingers crossed that fish is going to make it. Obviously, I've not gone without any disasters in this tank, and I have lost a couple of fish. I will mention those as we go, but for all intensive purposes, let's focus on the fish that are in there now. Alright, starting off with the biggest fish in my system, and he's just hiding down the middle here at the moment. That is Luka, my Atlantic blue tang. Now you might wonder, how did I come up with the name Luka? That's one that I can say that I named myself. If you're an NBA fan at all, you will know there's a 23-year-old currently dominating the NBA. His name is Luka Doncic, and I guess there's a little bit of a few degrees to the naming story for him. Luka is an Atlantic blue tang. Luka Doncic was originally drafted to the Atlanta Hawks and then was traded on draft day to the Dallas Mavericks, which are a blue team. So the Atlanta, the blue, and you know, kind of the fact that this guy is a little bit chubby and Luka doesn't exactly fit the mold for your current day NBA professional. He's a little bit loose, he's a bit big. He cops a bit of criticism for that, but he lets his game do the talking. So that was how we ended up with the name Luka for our Atlantic blue tang. And I can say that I actually picked this guy up from a fellow hobbyist. He's been in the tank now for probably close to a year. And he definitely is the boss in the system. He is the biggest fish. He does like to flex a little bit. Thankfully, he doesn't do any harm, but he does like to remind the other fish that he's the biggest and the baddest. He will swim around, and if anyone gets in his way, he'll just sort of speed up a little bit to let them know that he's there and this is his tank, and they're just fortunate enough to enjoy the space with him. Ironically though, despite being probably the bossiest fish in the tank, he's super shy with me. When I go to feed the fish, every night the fish come up and they grab the food out of my hand. Very rarely does Luka do that, despite the fact he's been with me now for close to 12 months. He will normally hover around about 6 inches below my hand, waiting for the food to be dropped out. So I don't know, maybe he's that old school traditional bully where he's actually got some internal issues that he's just portraying with his bulliness, but he's still a little shy with me. He does probably 2 or 3 times a week come and take some food out of my hand, but compared to literally every other fish in the tank that will come and take food out of my hand, this big sook just is a little bit shy and hangs a bit low. The other things I do love about him is that he's got that vibrant blue color. I did pick him up with his adult coloration already, so I never saw the transition from yellow to blue, but his vibrant blue colors does actually break out into some sort of paler blue stripes every now and then when he's a little bit scared. And as I touched on before, he is a bit of a scaredy cat, so he does get those stripes quite often. And normally whenever anyone comes over to the house and they see Luka, they think that he's some sort of striped tang because he's got stripes going along the length of his body and then these pale blue stripes going vertically up and down his body. But once he settles in and gets over the fact that they're not here to catch him, or maybe not here to eat him, he calms down and he gets his rich blue coloration back. But all in all, he's been a pretty cool addition to the tank. When I first added him with our second biggest fish, the lipstick blonde tang, it was a huge shift because up until that point I'd had fairly small fish in the tank, and adding these two monsters into the system, and I have to say the two of those guys that are hiding down here now would be a solid foot long each, maybe a touch over. So they're pretty big fish and they're pretty wide as well. And when two of those got added at the same time, it actually made me feel like my dream reef tank was probably a bit small. But thankfully, as time has gone on and they've settled into the system, they don't look out of place anymore. All right, moving on to my second biggest fish. It's a bit of a coin toss which one's the biggest, to be honest, but my blonde lipstick tang there, who has just decided to go behind the rocks because she's shy of the camera. We have affectionately named her Lily. This is one that my daughter named when she was 7 years old. She's Lily because she is called, her full name is Lily Big Lips. She is a blonde lipstick tang, and she does look like she's got that big sort of duck face pose going on. So she kind of affectionately got the nickname Lily, and then that nickname just stuck. But I did pick her up again off a fallow reef at the same time, the same tank as the Atlantic blue tang. And it kind of worked out pretty well because they're two big fish, they're by far the two biggest fish in this system. The fact that they had coexisted together before and then they went into this tank at the same time just helped mitigate any sort of aggression risks there. They were both new kids on the block, both about the same size, both probably about as aggressive as each other, and thankfully we didn't see any aggression whatsoever. Lily, interestingly, probably, I mean, I'm sure if she could speak, if you asked her, she would tell you, I say her, she's actually a male blonde lipstick tank. She does have the streamers on her tail, but my daughter called her Lily, so we affectionately refer to as a her is her pronoun. And if you asked Lily, I'm sure she would tell you that she's the boss of the tank. That being said, she doesn't show as much of a sort of bully personality as Luka does. She's much more placid up until about 8 p.m. each night, where she does like to do probably a good 24 laps of the tank at a decent speed. The same time every night, around that 7:30, 8 p.m. mark is when my chromis all go through their witching hour. They all sort of want to fight anyone and everyone in the tank, which is funny because they're pretty small, despite being pretty big for chromis. And I don't know if it's just the environmental conditions or if it's because the chromis are playing up, but every night at that time, Lily will start pacing up and down the tank, showing that she's a big girl or guy, and that anyone wants to mess with her, she'll make a light work of them. Now, the blonde lipstick tank for me was an absolute dream fish way back to when I first got involved in marine tanks. And I have to say that I have actually had a couple before and lost them with completely mysterious circumstances. Each time I've had one, I've had them for a good 2.5 years, between 2 and 2.5 years, and then they just wake up dead one morning. I'm absolutely crossing my fingers that it doesn't happen this time, because it will be the final time I try a blonde lipstick tang in the tank. Having killed a couple before, this is my last try. I want to make sure I get it right. Have gone about things a little bit different. I've got one that has come established from another reef tank that was in there for a few years. She's now been in this system for a year, and I like to say there's no aggression towards her or from her. She's eating well. Her condition looks fantastic. In fact, she's that thick you could probably cut a fillet off each side of her. However, that has been the case for each of my blonde lipstick tanks before. So she is a fish that I'm just going to touch wood with, because it has been one that I have had trouble with before, and frustratingly just one that I haven't been able to identify something that I've done wrong. Fingers crossed that this time either the larger tank, the different tank mates, or the advancements in filtration or foods will see that she lives a long and healthy life. All right, now to round out the trio of my biggest fish, although I must admit the third one's probably just a step down in size, is my fox face here. Now this dude I've had for an eternity. I actually bought him off a fallow reefer about 11 years ago. It was one of my first fish in the hobby. And at that point in time, the hobbyist I bought him off had also had him for about 7 or 8 years as well. So he's spent a good 19 plus years in aquarium life. And I have to say, he's an absolute gem of a fish. I would never consider having a main display tank without Colin in there. Now, I should explain how he got the name. This is one that my wife actually named. She's got a little bit of a punk rock background, and she knows this band called Melon Colin, and they have a song called Fox. Now, because he's a fox face, and then she thought of what could do with fox, and then she thought of this band Melon Colin, so we came up with the name Colin. much like the rest of my fish, there is this few degrees of separation for every name, but Colin has stuck, and he's an absolute gem of a fish. Now, Colin's one of those fish that, I don't know, he reminds me a little bit of a blue tang in that with every fish that I've added to a system with him as he's gone throughout our journey of reef keeping, he's just mimicked their behavior. So we've gone from having him follow clowns around and looking for him to find somewhere to host, to following some other tangs around, to even schooling with Chromis when that time came. He seems to be a fish that doesn't quite understand his own identity, but he's an absolute gem. I know the foxface do have the poisonous spines on top and bottom, but this dude is so friendly. He comes up and eats the food out of my hand every night, and if I'm not giving him enough of the food, if I'm trying to share it with the other fish, he'll affectionately give me a little nip on the fingers to sort of say, hey, I'm the OG, I'm the fish you've had the longest, you've got to give me a bit more of the food. But I can actually pat him on his side, I can pat him on his nose, and if he's been a bit cheeky, I can even give him a little tap on the nose to say, hey Colin, you've had enough food, time to share it around. And ironically, when I say you've had enough food, this dude had always been super chunky in my previous tank, and it wasn't until I added a couple of triggers, a couple of blue throat triggers, that there was no aggression between them whatsoever, but something about those triggers put his nose out of joint, and I slowly watched Colin go from being, you know, a good probably 3 inches thick, which was probably on the verge of unhealthy, to thinning right down to the point where you could see that spine on both sides of his body from head to tail, and he actually looked fairly unhealthy. So we managed to get him through the holding system when we had the change from the previous display tank to this display tank. He went into the holding system for a good, I think it was probably close to a year in the end there. And then he was one of the first fish added to the system after this one was ready and cycled. And I think the clownfish had been added for a little while first before he went in. And since then, I've just been focusing on getting the food back into him. And I'm really happy to say that if you ever look at Colin these days, he's probably not quite as chunky as he was originally, but he's probably a pretty healthy size now. In fact, a bit like myself, he's got a bit of a pot belly going on. So he's definitely getting enough nutrition now. And I must admit, I don't know how long Foxface lived for, but he's been with me for 11 years. He's been with a fellow hobbyist for a good 8 years on top of that. And I must admit, I hope I have him for another 10 years on top of this. So he's an absolute family member. Everyone in my family, from my daughter, my wife, my mum, and obviously myself, we all love Colin. And he's such a character of a fish, the way he gets about the tank. He loves his nori. He eats anything out of my hands. And he does perhaps keep some of the algae in the display tank at bay as well, but I wouldn't consider him a utilitarian fish. I just consider him an absolute family member. All right, moving on to the next tang in my system, one that copped a little bit of controversy lately because he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar. That is Prince, my purple tang over there. He's another fish that I have had a long time, got a very similar time as Colin, so it's been a good 10 to 11 years that he's been in systems with me. And up until a couple of months ago, when I did catch him ripping into my whitetail coal and my orange shoulder tang, I hadn't seen any aggression from him whatsoever, and I haven't seen any aggression from him since. In fact, he is the most placid fish that he actually controversially got a hall pass from that aggression, and I still will live to say whether I made the right decision or the wrong decision with that. But when you've had a fish for over a decade, it's pretty difficult to just move them on after a bad incident like that. So I guess he's living with a strike against his name now, but Prince is an absolute gorgeous fish. We've had him a long time, and his colors are so striking. The purple in him is just gorgeous, and that beautiful contrasting yellow on his tail and on his side flippers is just, it's just second to none. And I will point out that when he was a bit younger, I did get him as a fair juvenile, I'd say, or maybe an adolescent at best. He did have a really gorgeous, what I'd call a Morse code pattern on his side, where he'd have like a line and a dot, and a line and a dot, where as he's got a little bit older, those dots and lines have sort of just faded away on the rest of his body. He still has them on his nose and around the front of his head, but they just sort of fade into a solid purple at the back. And I think, just from my casual observations, that his tail used to be entirely yellow. Now it's actually got a little line of purple that's grown on there. I'm not sure if that was always there and it's just intensified, or I didn't notice it before, but he definitely does have purple bleeding onto his tail now. And I don't know, it gives him a little bit of uniqueness, I guess. And whilst he did cause us a little bit of stress there a while back, he is a fish that has brought us an immense amount of joy, and another one that I hope that will continue to be with us for a long time. All right, moving on to my second smallest tang in the system, and he's very similar to Prince, my purple tang, is Onyx down here, my gem tang. This is one of those fish that in my previous display, I always viewed as an absolute dream fish, but because I'd already had a pretty established tang gang in that system, I could not add in. Plus, I just didn't have the budget to purchase a gem tang at that point in time. So when it came to the time to save and plan and prepare for my dream reef tank, a gem tang was always on the list. Now, I'm happy to say that he's been with me now for a bit over a year. I picked him up from Williamstown Aquarium, quite close to a local to me, and then the fine people at Deer Park Aquarium held on to him to make sure his condition was perfect and to make sure that he was ready to go in with the rest of my tang gang, because I didn't quite have all of the other pieces to add at the same time just yet. So huge shout out to both of those guys, both Williamstown Aquarium providing a gorgeous fish and Deer Park Aquarium for just holding on to him until he was ready to go in my system, which I should point out is not something they'll do for every customer. I was very fortunate and I did pay for the holding fee just to make sure that, you know, my local fish shop wasn't out of pocket for keeping an eye on my fish and also feeding him. And also I took on the responsibility if he didn't make it in their holding system, that's bad luck on me, not bad luck on them. Now, Onyx is a fish that, like I said, has been a dream fish for a long time of mine. And I have to say, I think he's a little bit older. I don't think he's a juvenile. Only reason why I say that, and I'm absolutely, completely unqualified to say this, is his tail's not quite as vibrant yellow as I was hoping. I was hoping once he got into a system and he settled in, the yellow would come through a bit more, but I have to say it's probably a little bit more of a muted yellow or a mustard color. But he's one of those fish that when you look up close, he's just got those beautiful marks on him. He's a beautiful solid black with these gray dots through him that I have to admit, when you get a good picture of him on macro, particularly with flash, he is one of those fish that really shows his colors with the flash, which is quite unusual. Most of them sort of dull out with flash. And he has been an absolute peaceful community member of the tank. Even when the aggression was going down and I did lose a couple of fish, he was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't interested in partaking. And I suspect that's because he's very similar, the same subspecies as Prince, our purple tang. And Prince has probably claimed the top dog of the zebrasomas. And I think Onyx just doesn't want to step out of line because he will probably get put back in his place. But he's one of those fish that just kicks about all day, super peaceful. He doesn't cause any dramas with anyone. He loves his nori. He's probably a little bit more timid than the other fish, but again, I think that's because he's just making sure that everyone knows he's second ranking to Prince. But he's just a fish that just goes about his business every day, and we're super grateful to have him because he has been one of those fish that I've wanted a long time. All right, last but not least of my tang gang is Colonel down here, my mustard tang. You could potentially work out where the name came from, and that's Colonel Mustard from Cluedo. He's a mustard tang, so we called him Colonel. And I have to say the name kind of fits well from a military perspective because despite being the smallest tang in the tank, he has got so much spunk about him, it's ridiculous. He loves being a bit cheeky and just pestering the bigger fish in the tank. He'll just kind of hover about their face and just swim around them, almost wanting to play like a little toddler or something, until they eventually crack it with him and chase after him. But of course, he's too quick and too nimble and they can't get anywhere near him. I'm hoping that that is just a little bit of playful nature, but he does tend to go from big fish to big fish every now and then when he just wants to be a bit of a prick and stir up a bit of trouble. But like I said, thankfully it doesn't lead to anything more than that. When he's not stirring up the big fish, he does seem to love, and it's a fish that, you just see him going up there now, he loves going and cleaning the face of my wave makers, and I don't know if it's because of the algae on there or if he gets a bit of a thrill out of the flow from the pumps, because he absolutely seems to enjoy the wave or the push he gets off from the waves. He's quite a strange fish. He'll do that all day, every day, but he's the sole remainder of my trio of small tangs. Like I touched on before, I did lose my whitetail coal and my orange shoulder tang. The three of them went in together as small tangs. He's the only one that survived that little aggression patch, and to be honest, it kind of makes me laugh because he was the one that would have been peeing off the big fish the most. But I just saw him, he's up there cleaning the Vortec MP60 now. Such a strange fish, but I have to admit he was one of those ones that previously was considered a poor man's gem tang, because gem tangs used to be priced up here and mustards used to be down there. As the time's gone on, they've kind of almost balanced out. If anything, the gem's probably cheaper than the mustard tang now, but mainly because of the spots on the side of him, you've got that relationship to the gem tang, but otherwise they're completely different fish. And I'm curious to see how his character goes as he gets older and a bit bigger in the system. Hopefully his cheekiness just dies down a little bit, because when he does get a bit bigger, he's not going to be able to get away from the other guys after picking on them. So fingers crossed the Colonel just tones it down a little bit. Oh, I should point out that I've had Colonel now for about a year, maybe a touch over, and I did pick him up from my local fish shop, Deer Park Aquarium, who again got him in and held him until all of those pieces of the tanks came together so I could add them at once. Huge thumbs up to the service at Deer Park Aquarium. All right, guys, we are getting near the end of part one, and you can see now I did split this into at least 2 parts. I'll see if I can wrap the rest of the fish up in part 2, but I do have 3 more fish to cover for you today. First of all, I've got my Ballas Angel pair. Now, one of those I've had for about a year, the other one I've had for about a month. I was holding out to add a male to the system, but they just didn't come up all that often, and when they did, they were very expensive. The females were coming up a little bit more often, so I picked up a second female in the hopes of getting a little transition from 2 females to 1 female and 1 male. So I'm really excited to see how that goes, and I'll be sure to document that so you can see the process here. They've been super cool additions. I was very, very hesitant to add another dwarf angel into my system with my long-term dwarf angel Prius, which we'll cover next. But I'm grateful to say that despite a little bit of argy-bargy in the first couple of days and maybe one half-spirited chase a week after that, there's been absolutely zero aggression between them. And I was equally nervous adding the second Ballas Angel into the tank to try and pair them up. And again, there was a little bit of aggression, maybe just a little bit of chasing for the first couple of days. Now the 2 kick about quite happily together. And in fact, you will see the new one following the existing one around most of the day, which is pretty cool to see. You can see them both over there now. The only way I can tell them apart at the moment is the existing one, which we named Belle. Not a very original name, but Ballas and Belle. We'd been watching Beauty and the Beast, and Belle's the lead character in that. So Belle the angelfish, or Belle the Ballas angelfish, again named by my daughter with a little infringement on Disney, but I'm sure they won't mind at all if we name our fish Belle. And then to add to Belle, we've added Gaston. However, those names are a little bit fluid because depending on which one turns male, if either of them, the one that turns male will get called Gaston, and the remaining one that stays female will be called Belle. These fish have been absolutely coral safe. I know that they're meant to be, but sometimes when things are reef safe and you put them in a tank, they do just nip at corals a little bit, but they've shown zero interest in coral whatsoever. They will have a look at some sand and maybe some algae on the back of a snail, but have never seen them touch a coral. They will come up and have a look at it every now and then, and I'll watch them closely, but never nip it at all. And I have to say, I absolutely love their colors and markings. They give a real presence and just a very proud coloration on the fish, and having 2 in there is really cool, particularly when you see the new one follow the old one around. All right, on to the final fish of part 1, and I deliberately picked Prius to go last. Prius is my hybrid. Here he is over the back there, my hybrid dwarf angel, and you could possibly guess that's where the name has come about. Prius is a hybrid car. And Prius, my dwarf angel, is a hybrid between a lemon peel and an Eebly dwarf angel. They affectionately get the name a tiger pike, mainly because of, well, I think because of the tiger stripes on the side of them. There could be a more scientific name or reason for that name. He has been with me a very long time, and in fact, there's quite an interesting story about him. My local fish shop did get a tiger pike in many, many years ago. We're talking probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And it came in, it was quite an expensive fish. These guys, I'll just tell you right now, they're very rare, they're quite expensive. They got only more expensive over the last few years, but even nearly a decade ago, they were quite expensive. And when it first came in, I was like, oh yeah, that's a pretty fish, but there's no way known I'd ever spend that. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I'm like, you know what, if that fish was a little bit cheaper, I reckon I'd buy it. He's so beautiful. Another couple of weeks later, I got to the point where I'm like, can you do any discount on that fish? I'd love to add him. Fast forward another couple of weeks, and driving to my local fish shop, I'm like, I've saved up the money. I'm going to buy that hybrid dwarf angel because he's one of the prettiest fish I've ever seen. And sure enough, I walk into my store and or into my local store, and he's been sold. So I had a pocket, I wouldn't say it was full of cash, but I had saved aside some money to buy a fairly expensive fish, and had convinced myself. Up until that point, I think the most I'd ever spent on a fish was about $200, and this was over 10 times that price. I'd convinced myself that I was going to buy one, and then I was kind of left in the lurch a little bit. And knowing the rarity of these fish, I did not expect another one to come up anytime soon, or if it was going to come up, not at a price that I could afford. Thankfully for me, while I was actually up in the roof laying some automatic water change tubing to the previous display tank here, I had to take a little bit of a break up there because it's incredibly hot and it's fairly manual work, and I don't do manual labor that much. I'm an office warrior. So I was taking a break and I was having a look online, and I saw, funnily enough, a tiger pike dwarf angel for sale in another state here in Australia. It's about 9 hours away, and the price was right. It's still an expensive fish, don't get me wrong, but I had the money and it was ready to spend. This was probably about 4 or 5 weeks after I'd missed out on the one at my local fish shop. So I got talking to the seller and we arranged a deal. I jumped in the car very early the next morning, drove 9 hours over there, picked up the fish that was beautifully packaged. He came in a bucket of water with a battery operated air pump on top, came with a second bucket of water, so if he fouled the water, I could easily transfer him over to the other bucket of water. Drove 9 hours back again, so it was a good 18, 19 hour day. Got home, acclimated him, went to grab him in the net and dropped him on the floor. A little bit sleep deprived, I think, but added him into the system and the rest has been history. He is by far my showpiece fish. He's the fish that the majority of people do not recognize because you don't see him at every reef tank. And I will say that he's an absolute pain in the rear. He spends all day, every day, just nipping at any and every coral he likes. Now, thankfully, he doesn't really kill the coral. He doesn't destroy it. He does like to keep SPS polyps let's say under control. He likes to make sure the polyp extension's not too big, and with some soft corals I will see him occasionally nipping at a scully. I don't really try acans or truckophilias in this tank because I think he would have a decent feast on them. But all in all, he gets away with it because he is my baby, and you know, everyone's got that favorite in their tank that you will let get away with murder, and that is absolutely Prius for me. I know some people say with dwarf angels, if you keep them well fed, they won't touch your corals. If you have a good look at Prius and how wide he is, there's no worries with how much food he's getting, whether that's the food I'm preparing, which he does go pretty hard at feeding time, I must admit, or whether his belly's full of coral polyps. I don't know, but he's a super fat fish, and I should point out that he's also a pretty angry fish. He doesn't really have any firepower. He doesn't have the scalpels on the side like the tangs do. He's only got a couple of little barbs here, and being such a small fish and also pretty chubby, to be honest, when he gets angry, there's not a lot he can do about it. He'll sort of half chase a fish, but he's kind of like, I don't know, when you see like those American movies and you see like the mall cop that is pretty overweight and he sees like some kids shoplifting and he goes to chase them and he gets 2-3 steps into the chase and then he's like, oh, damn you kids. That's exactly what I think of Prius, because he just has no firepower whatsoever, but he is still my favorite fish in the system. So unique and gets attention from new people that don't know anything about reef keeping all the way through to the most advanced and experienced reef keeper. When they come and look at my tank, everyone's always amazed with Prius, and I must admit, even after 10 years or almost 10 years, I still am every day as well. Alright guys, thank you so much for sitting through and listening to the backstory of all of the fish in my system, or at least part 1. Never fear, I will get to part 2 in the coming weeks. I do have a couple of tank tours to do this weekend coming, so I will get the videos out for those as quickly as I can, because I know everyone out there enjoys the tank tours as much as I do filming them. And if you'd like to see your tank added to the tank tours, please do reach out, because thankfully now I am able to get out and about, and I'm super keen to go and see as many reef tanks as I can and share them with all of you fine folk on YouTube. If you get the chance, I would love to hear about some of the quirky names you have for your fish. Please add them in the comment section down below. I do personally reply to each and every comment there, so it is the best way to get hold of me, and I love to hear the backstories and namings of some of the fish out there. It's one of the things that I think is totally underrated in this hobby, of ways that you can get your family members involved in the fish tank. Letting a family member name a fish just instantly gets their buy-in on the system, and it just goes a long way to get that approval factor to add more fish or to spend the money we do spend on this crazy hobby. But other than that guys, till next time, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and maybe even consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds of your time, costs no money whatsoever. And of course, if you'd like to join our membership program and put forward some ideas for future videos, I wouldn't say no to that either. There's a little join button in the bottom down there. That'll tell you everything you need to know. Other than that guys, till next time, stay safe, keep reefing. Cheers, bye.